Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to talk about studying the endgame, how to do it effectively and how to not waste time, and almost how to get it out of the way in order to prepare for tournament play, but it's going to be more than that. So I'm going to talk about my personal experience, but I'm also going to talk about everything I've learned from books and very strong players, coaches, grandmasters, and so on. So first we have to define the endgame. The endgame is a simplified position, and the majority of the pieces have in most cases been traded off, and it's relatively simple compared to the middle game. It's also very unlikely for the game to finish, in tactical fashion with a combination or with checkmate. Now, the endgame can be divided into two parts. And I love how Miller defines these two types of endgames. Firstly, technical endgames are those endgames in which the result is obvious to good players. So in a technical endgame, we know who should win. If you have a Lucina endgame and it's white to play, white has a pawn on e7, white should win. Now, whether you can win that endgame or not is a different animal altogether, but technical endgames are those in which a good player would know the expected outcome. The other type of endgame, and there are many names for these, are complex endgames or, whatever else you want to call them, are, according to Miller and many other authors, an endgame or endgames in which the result is still, to be seen, and there is still a game left to be played. Now, before we delve into the more complex part of endgames, I want to talk about the technical positions. And there are many, many resources for those. I have some books here that I like. For example, Bondarenko's book on pawn endgames. It covers not just simple positions, not just technical positions, but it also covers complex pawn endgames. But the point is, if you want to cover technical pawn endgames, this book is good. So is Jesus de la Villa's book. So is Mark Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual. And there are probably 20 other books that cover technical positions well. My point is, studying technical positions is finite, and that's something you should just get out of the way. I've been starting out with a new student recently, and we did a plan where he was going to cover the basic endgames by himself. There's really no point in going over, let's say, the Lucina or the Philidor or learning the opposition with a coach. Unless you're really struggling, you should try it on your own by yourself at first and get it out of the way. And the technical positions, even though they are way simpler to understand, to cover, get out of the way, are the basis for understanding everything that comes next. So, there are maybe 20 very important technical positions, maybe 20. You could say that there are over 100 positions you could know, but there are 20 essential ones. What do I mean by that? You cannot learn complex rook endgames without knowing the long side, the short side, the checking squares. I'm sorry, I'm outside because it's really nice and there are cars and stuff. So you have to learn the basics before you move on to more complex endgames in the same niche, let's say. You have to know the Philidor, the Lucina, the long side, whatever else before moving to complex endgames. Now, there are technical positions which are extremely difficult and one could say unnecessary. And this book is a great example. This is a great book. Berkes and Karolyi wrote, in my opinion, the best book on queen endgames ever written. It's notoriously difficult to digest and to follow the variations in the book. You need two boards, in my opinion. I'm joking, but you need a board on the side and you need to spend a long time with this. And these are technical positions which, of course, will come in useful. but the probability of them actually occurring in the game are extremely rare. Knowing them won't hurt, but you can also get on without them. Maybe that's not a fair thing to say, but I think you can. That being said, if you want to master technical endgames, there are separate resources for each type of endgame. For example, Fine's books or forgot Averbach's books, excuse me, on the endgame, and more modern resources like this for queen endgames. John Nunn actually wrote a book on rook endgames where the book is literally structured like this. Rook and A pawn, rook and A and C pawn, so literally every combination of pawn and rook, and those are all technical positions. You can learn them in extreme detail. So what I would say about technical endgames is get a simple book, like Jesus de la Villa's Endgames. Go through that, cover the basics. Then if you want to, go through each separate type of technical endgame in detail, study it, get a separate resource. Now the second part. The second part are complex endgames, and studying them never ends. I like what Hansen did in Secrets of Chess Endgame Strategy, where there was a division on 15 or so, I'll put them on the screen, things you have to look out for and appreciate in complex endgames in order to navigate them well. We're going to start with that to make it simpler to understand what I'm about to say. So the division is pawn structure, 2 weaknesses, space advantage, squares and files, suppressing counterplay, domination, time, which is very important, right exchanges, transformation of advantages, 2 bishops, bishop or knight, king activity, rook activity, initiative, and stalemate tricks, mate and stalemate. As you can see here, complex endgames are way different to technical ones. We've no idea who's going to win, but we can determine who's better, if anyone, based on these factors. And I think this is the best list I found, and I did cover a lot of endgames. So what we have to do in complex endgames is plan, think ahead, instead of calculating or applying the rules we know from books. There is a way to do that, and I find that studying master games is the best way to get better at complex endgames. And for example, if you study Petrosyan, who was famous for defending, if you study Fischer, who's famous for very active play, same as Kasparov. Let's say you study Kasparov and Fischer when it comes to piece activity in the endgame, you study Petrosyan when it comes to prophylaxis and defense in the endgame. You cover 100 of their endgames, you're going to have a pretty good idea of how to play with rook and bishop if you were going through Fischer's games, or how to suppress counterplay if you were going through Petrosyan games. That being said, Fischer wasn't bad in defending, neither was Petrosyan bad at active play. That's just what they are famous for. So I think that studying master games, studying the classics, while applying this list, in a sense that you're actively searching for ways to figure out whose position is favorable based on this list, helps a lot. Now, the second point that I would like to make is, now, and everyone agrees with this, practical endgames or complex endgames are something that they are a skill. It's a skill to play the endgame well. And while one could mate with bishop and knight, blindfolded, Ben Feingold can do it without really thinking about the position. That's knowledge that can never go away. You can never mess it up. You're always going to be able to checkmate. But playing complex endgames is a skill. And same as navigating middle games, it requires experience. So the best way to get better at them is to play. And study and going over master games is great. But if you don't play endgames yourself, then you're not going to make progress. So in my opinion, the best way to do this is to find a sparring partner and play endgames out against them. So I'll give you an example. I just finished a tournament in Trieste in Italy, just came back 2 days ago. I played a couple of endgames. One of them was particularly bad. Even though I was down a pawn, rook and knight versus rook and knight, and I lost without a fight. And that's an understatement. I lost without, it seemed without trying. So what I did is I played that endgame out against a friend of mine. He's weaker than me, but he's a strong player. Strong player, that's debatable. I'm not a strong player. But I played that endgame out several times, and I managed to beat him. So the question is, how far can you go without playing out endgames you don't understand? And I think the answer is not far. Which brings me to my next point. If you don't have a person to play against, you can use Noctie. If you're like me and you think practicing against the engine is boring because it either crushes you or plays like an idiot, try playing against Noctie. Noctie is a human-like AI that's going to adapt to your strength, is going to play like a human, try to trick you like a human, and challenge you on your own level. The first thing you can do is, of course, assess your rating, and you can play a rating test against Noctie. Yeah, the only move is g4 and then queen f4 mate? Yeah. Good. Yes! 2557! Come on! It's going to tell you your strength, but there are many, many more features. The first thing is, when you play Noctie, you get instant feedback, and all of your moves will get sort of color-coded. Noctie will immediately tell you if you made a mistake. That way you can ask Noctie to see where you went wrong. You can play games in openings you're trying to learn. So you can import any repertoire you want and play Noctie in that specific opening. Just go to repertoires. I've imported the Hillbilly when I was doing the video on the Hillbilly, but you can obviously create any repertoire. Just paste the PGN, and if you, for example, play the London system, you can play the London system against Noctie. Flashcards are an excellent tool, and I've spoken to Samuel, the owner and inventor of Noctie. He's going to make them even better. Flashcards are basically the mistakes you made in your games. Noctie is going to make you pay attention to them, and in the future they're going to be grouped according to theme, so it's going to be even easier to navigate your mistakes. One of my favorite features, if not my favorite one, and the one I use the most, is themes. So you can play Noctie in any specific position you choose. So if you go to your themes, you can see that I've made quite a few. So let's say you want to play out this position. This is a position from Spassky's game where he triangulated perfectly. If you're trying to practice something, you can create a new team. Just add an FEN or a PGN and play it out against Noctie. That way, if you have an endgame you would like to practice, you don't have to find an actual human to play against, nor will you have to play against a 2800 engine or against a 500 engine human. If you would like to check Noctie out, you can follow the link in the description, and if you would like to get a 64% discount, use the code HANGING Pawns. Thank you very much for this. Thank you, Noctie, for sponsoring the video, and let's get back. Now, master games and gaining skill but by playing out endgames you don't understand is probably the easiest way to make progress. Instead of that, we can also use resources provided by very strong coaches. I have a few of my favorites here. For example, Agard's Endgame Play. Now, this is basically a puzzle book. You're not going to learn simple technical endgames. You're not going to learn any principles that you might find in beginners' books. You're going to work your way through extremely difficult positions. You're going to calculate, you're going to plan things out, and you're going to solve positions. This is very, very similar to practical play, although extreme compared to what you normally get over the board, because the positions are handpicked, very difficult, and meant for almost master level players. So that's a resource I've been using. Another one is Miller's and Fishbein's Endgame Corner, another wonderful book. Once again, no technical endgames, no rules, no principles, 450 exercises that you solve, and that's it. I mean, it develops your skill. And finally, this is a very underrated book, I think. It's basically Dvoretsky's material written down or compiled by Artur Yusupov. It's called Technique in Chess. I think the name is slightly misleading. This is about endgame technique and about converting dominant positions. So when you have an endgame advantage, when you have an imbalance, when you are supposed to convert, oftentimes we don't do that. This game teaches you how to do that. It's a very small book, and I love it. So, for example, one of the first chapters is a player's behavior in better positions. I love that. He also goes into general principles of the endgame, realizing an advantage, positional advantage, 4 golden principles of technique, do not allow counterplay, do not hurry, and so on, so on. There are many other books, I just don't have the majority of my library here. One book I really like is Shereshevsky's Endgame Strategy, but that's a very light read, and it mostly focuses on principles you can follow, and there are a couple of games thrown in there which you can analyze. So to sum this up, I know we haven't gone through any positions, but I keep getting the same question over and over again. I got the same question 4 times in my Lichess inbox in the last couple of weeks. How do I get better at the endgame? So here are the steps I would advise you to follow. Step number 1, get a book with technical positions. It could be any book. It really doesn't matter. It could be Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual or De La Villa or any other book. Get that out of the way. If you're using Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual, don't go through all the positions. Go through the simple positions. King and pawn and rook endgames are the most important. Once you're done with that, you have your bases covered. Step number 2 is start working on your technique. In order to do that, I would recommend you to do 3 things simultaneously. First, get a book, any book on endgame strategy. I don't have one here, but for example, Shereshevsky or Miller or Hansen. Get one book that goes beyond technical positions. Step number 2, choose a player you like. Choose, I don't know, I like Fischer, I like Karpov, I like Petrosyan. For example, those 3. You can also, of course, use Rubinstein or Kramnik or whatever. There are 100 good endgame players. Choose them, go to chessgames.com, go through all of their games. Every game that finished in an endgame or that went into an endgame, get that game, get the PGN, sort it into a Lichess study, export it, go to Noctie, or again, if you have a human you can play them against that human, and play them out. So start with, let's say you chose Rubinstein. You're playing Rubinstein positions as soon as they enter an endgame. You be the judge of when the endgame starts. Play them out. Try to win, try to win, try to win. If Rubinstein lost that game, maybe the endgame was losing in the first place. That doesn't mean you're going to lose. So do that. And step number 3, every endgame you play, every endgame you analyze, every endgame you read about in a book, You have to understand what you didn't understand during play or during analysis. This is a step many people overlook, many people neglect, many people take lightly. There is no way to improve if you keep making the same mistakes over and over again. In order to prevent you from making the same mistakes over and over again, you have to correct your faulty thinking processes. So say I'm playing out Rubinstein against someone, against my friend. And Rubinstein won, I lost. Why? Why? How? I will, of course, analyze the game with my friend, if he is kind enough to do that. If not, I will use the engine. I will see where I went wrong. Once you do that, I would suggest that you compile another chess study of endgames you have misplayed. Even if you won, go through the analysis, see whether you went wrong, see whether there were resources you missed. And finally, I would advise you to compile, it could be a simple scrapbook of screenshots of positions where you missed a winning move, or where you went from winning to drawing, where you went from drawing to losing. Basically, positions where the evaluation changed so dramatically that the outcome of the game has changed. I have a very simple folder on Google Drive with literally screenshots of my screen with hundreds of endgame positions where I made such a bad mistake that the game went from winning to losing, or from winning to drawing, or from drawing to losing. And every now and then I'm going to go through these positions. I also use them in lessons with my students. So I know that this was a video where I didn't really go into particular endgames. I think you can do that on your own. But I still hope it was helpful. Once again, excuse the noises. It's really nice out here, so I prefer to be outside. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.